again, good evening to you all. Shall we just give them one more, because more and more people are joining. It's very nice, and there's a beep all the time when someone tries to. It's not too annoying for you. For me, it is. Could you do me the favor to co-host me so that the beep all the time does not appear, and then when we need it, that you could make me the host again? Is that possible? Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, we are 30 people. So I think it's a good time, a good number to start today's session. Would like to warmly welcome you to today's session. Just in case that you don't know where you are, what you're participating, I will just recall it really quick. You are joining the Digital Academy. We have the topic of Protestantism between nationalism and cosmopolitanism, and this is a digital academy until next year, February, and there will be also a conference in Vienna in May 2022. So welcome you again. Now we are 30. No, we're 28. Two dropped out. Wow. Welcome from on behalf of the Protestant League of Hesse, of the Commune of European Churches, of Protestant Churches in Europe, and also of the ZETO, the Center of Protestant Theology of Eastern Europe. If you may, I would like you to mute your microphones, but leave your cameras on, so don't switch them off. It's always nice to see faces, to see whom we are talking to, or lectures today. Yes, as I said before, Protestantism, nationalism, and cosmopolitanism is our topic. And last time we talked about the church and identity, local congregation, national church, and Europe in the first lecture. And today's topic will, of course, not conclude, but follow the remarks we had in the first lecture. But today we will take a different angle to our topic. The title of today's lecture is The Variety of Christian Identities, Ecumenical Perspectives. So before we get started with a little survey, I would like to share my screen. So I will give you an insight into today's lecture and the schedule, what's going to happen today. And here. All right. Are you all able to see the presentation? Just a quick, or someone just open your mic and tell me if you all see it. That would be nice.
Yes, I can see it.
Thank you very much for your contribution. Okay. So as I said before, the variety of Christian identities, ecumenical perspectives is today's topic. And as I said before I introduce our two lectures of tonight, here is the schedule of today. So the welcome is something I did already. We had the introduction. And the next thing will be a short survey with teaser questions, just to get an idea of today's question, what we're talking about, to get you started with the topic. Then we're going to have the inputs of our two lectures. After the inputs, there will be a short time slot for a comprehension question. That is not a discussion. That is just if you did not quite understand the point or something from the lectures, but not the discussion itself. This is going to happen in two steps. The first one is a group discussion in breakout rooms with key questions for the breakout rooms, and then a short presentation of your findings in your groups. And afterwards, that is the last one, the discussion in plenum. So what were your discussions in your breakout rooms, and what is something you would like to say to everyone, something you would like to share? All right, so let's get started. Let's start first of all with the teaser question. And actually, there are two teaser questions. I'm not sure if you are familiar with Mentimeter. That is a tool where you can make surveys or polls, and I made two of them. So I'm gonna put the questions, the links into the chat, and I would like you to follow the link and just give your answers. All right, so that was the first one. And just for your notice, it's just a real quick survey. So don't think too much, just put your answers. You have 2 or 3 possibilities. This is just a really quick teaser of a couple of minutes. So you can find the link now in the chat. Oh, before I do them, sorry, I forgot something. The question is just teaser on Mentimeter. The thing is, we talk about identities. So I would like to get you back your attention here. We talk about identities, and there's always the question: is identity something fluid, or is identity something essential, something that is very fixed? And if you read on the homepage, you can see that identities is not only does not only derive from the denomination, the confession itself, but of course has different factors like like the history of a country, the cultural influence, and so on. And so the first question, one I've just posted now, is the question: how big is this influence from, let's say, the outside? How big is the influence from culture, from politics, maybe from history on your own denomination? And that is the first question. So now you can answer this question: how big is that influence?
Maybe you can share also the Mentimeter code, because my laptop is not able to open the link.
It's not open. It's not possible to. Okay.
So my laptop is not able. I guess the others, but my laptop has problems with this. So.
Okay. So how shall I do that? Send you a message. Well, that won't help, right? Because since you cannot open it, how shall I share it?
Maybe on Mentimeter you must see a code, like a number.
Usually works. It's working for everyone else. Just a question, or is someone else having troubles with the link? If so, please tell me. Okay, at least it seems to be working for everyone else. I will see for the code if I can submit that to you in a different way. I'm very sorry, but I don't see the number. Unfortunately, you will have just to see what the result of the other ones are. So almost a lot of people participated already. 22 people. That's very nice. Maybe there are some more answers coming in next minutes. Maybe. Oh, that's sense. We go into the presentation. Okay, so let me share your screen again. So these are your answers. Let's see about it. So how big is the influence? Almost the same. So if we see on this, yeah, almost same. Okay, so it doesn't really have to be, seem to have a big impact, influence. According to your opinion, the influence of culture, of history is quite the same on your own denomination and maybe the largest denominations, or if necessary, if you are in your country the largest denomination, then the denomination next side. Slightly you suggest that the influence is higher on the largest denomination of your country. Okay, so now to the second question. So with the first one, I asked about the influence on denomination. Now I asked on these factors I just talked about. So is the denomination itself a factor? If it's like resistant or not so resistant, or not not validating it, but just your opinion on it. Is history of a denomination in a particular country, does this matter very much? Or is it more the size that's relevant if you are in a minority or in a majority situation? So I've, yeah, like you to complete this survey as well. Then we see what the results are with this one.
We don't have the link.
Did it work? I'm sorry. Thank you very much for.
We can see it now.
Okay. Oh, and you can see it. So now I posted the link now.
Yeah, we can see the link now in the chat.
Perfect. Okay. Okay. Last chance, last minute before we see what your answers to this question were. Let's see. Okay, so there's a clear indication for the history of a domination in a particular country, but that will be the most influential factor when it comes to the influence the shaping of the identity of a certain domination in a certain country. So you voted that one here was very high with an average of 8. Lots of 6, 4, 6 people, 6 here with 10 as well. The next one would be the size itself. So whether you are in a minority situation or in a majority situation, lots of people, 8 participants voted on 9. So this one was 6.9. And that is interesting that the denomination itself, whether you're Lutheran, whether you're Catholic, or you're Orthodox, or any other Christian denomination, you suggest that it would be the least, or the smallest factor, which is very interesting. Okay, thank you very much for your participation. The next thing we're going to carry on with is the lectures themselves. Before we do that, I'm going to give you a short presentation of our today's lecturers. You could really say we found the perfect lecturers for today's session. Both of them come from different backgrounds, but both of them live in different European countries, and they experience different settings of cultural settings and different confessional settings. And not only in 2, but in several countries they've been living throughout the last years. Let me start with Professor Tobler. Currently he is the co-director of the Institute of Ecumenical Research in the University of Sibiu, which is in Romania. He has, as I said before, a lot of experience in different corners of Europe. He studied in Switzerland, in Italy for 2.5 years, been to the Netherlands for 12 years, in Romania for 18 years. And so he has the background of a Catholic, a Reformed, and of course an Orthodox country, as in where the majority is Catholic, Reformed, or Orthodox. He did his PhD at the Free University Vrije Universiteit van Amsterdam, and his postdoc in the Protestant University of Tübingen. Well, not only when it comes to career, but also the family is very interesting when it comes to today, his family background. They represent 3 different Christian confessions within the family. So Evangelical, Orthodox, and Greek Catholic. And 3 different ethnic and national roots. So from Switzerland, from Romania, and also Roma. He wrote that to me. I found that very interesting when he gave me his presentation. Our second lecturer will be Katerina Pekridou. As you might hear, she is from Greece. So she is an Orthodox theologian from Greece. And she works, as you can see, at the Conference of European Churches. Conference of European Churches is a fellowship of 114 Anglican, Orthodox, and Protestant churches in Europe continent. She is working at the KEC as an executive secretary for Theological Dialogue. And prior to this, she served in the academic association at the Institute for Missiology and the Studies of Theology Beyond Europe at the University of Münster. She also studied in a lot of different places, in Thessaloniki, in Boston, in Dublin, and in Göttingen. And she's also a doctoral candidate at the faculty in Leuven in Belgium. Professor Tobler will be the first one to start with his talk. And Professor Tobler, I'm not sure if you have a presentation on your own, if you want to share your screen, or if you... that the case?
Yes, I would like to share my screen.
So I think Volkmar, that's where you come in, or otherwise, or can you already share it?
Stop sharing. Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, so I hand it over to you, Mr. Volkmar. Looking forward very much to your presentation.
Thank you very much for your introduction. I'm happy to speak with you all, and I look forward to hearing the results of your discussion in the breakout rooms. My task is to give in 20 minutes a short first perspective on the variety of Christian identities, ecumenical perspectives. Protestantism between nationalism and cosmopolitanism, this is the general topic of our digital academy. It denotes a polarity between two orientations or convictions, a short line between two opposite points. We can find as individual or group or church, locate ourselves on this line. We can say perhaps more on the left or the right hand. We can identify our position. We can ask as Protestants, are we more cosmopolitans or more nationalists? And when I express it like that, we can easily see that the reality is much more complex. We have to consider not only the huge differences between the countries in Europe, between contexts of majorities or minorities, between East and West, but in itself, we have to ask ourselves about the complexity of what constitutes a Christian identity. In order to give an input for our reflections and discussions, I propose to focus on one local example, the one I live in, the region of Transylvania within Romania. I do it in 3 parts. My lecture has 3 parts. Okay. These are the 3 subtitles of my lecture. Variety of Christian identities in our region and the variety of elements which constitute the identity of our church, and then 3rd, crisis and transformation. I begin with the first one, variety of Christian identities in our region, Transylvania. Transylvania is the region in the very heart of Romania between the Carpathian Mountains. Some of you may know something or much about the history of Transylvania with its diversity of churches, in some senses unique in Europe. For those who don't know much, it's worth to give a very short overview on the situation in order to locate ourselves, starting with the 16th century, the Reformation. Already before, since the 12th century at least, in this region, different groups lived together, ethnic, linguistic, cultural groups. The main groups were Hungarians, Romanians, and Germans. There were other minor groups too. In a time of Reformation, at the end of the 16th century, in the 16th century, many Hungarians became Reformed Christians, while others remained Roman Catholic. A 3rd group, unique in whole Europe, were the Unitarians, a church without the dogma of God as Trinity. In the German-speaking communities, Lutheran faith prevailed very soon, and the Romanians remained Orthodox. In 1568, the political leaders of the Principality Transylvania declared in an edict the principle of tolerance, with guaranteed a quite peaceful coexistence of 5 Christian churches in this area, quite unique in this period. So this Reformed, Unitarian, Lutheran, Roman Catholic, Orthodox. And later, after 1700, a part of the Romanian Orthodox Church declared union with Rome and became the so-called Greek Catholic Church. Short overview. Which are the reasons for this unique situation of tolerance, of a more or less peaceful coexistence of churches during centuries after Reformation? I think I would mention 3, perhaps 4 reasons. First is geographical reasons. We were in Transylvania at the margins of the big empires. the margins of the Ottoman Empire in the 16th and 17th century. The Ottoman Empire didn't intervene in internal religious questions. They let it to the internal orders. And at the margins of the Austro-Hungarian Empire in the 18th and 19th century, also the Habsburgan Empire, despite its strong Catholic identity, allowed Protestant churches to live far away from Vienna. There were political reasons for the tolerance, because especially in the time under the Ottoman Empire, for the Principality of Transylvania, it was crucial not to lose power due to internal tensions or even civil war. Tolerance between the ethnic groups and churches was a question of survival. And then the cultural reasons. The boundaries between the churches coincided quite exactly with the boundaries of linguistic or ethnic groups. Romanians were Orthodox, later also Greek Catholics. The Germans were Lutheran, and Hungarians, Roman Catholic, Reformed, or Unitarian. These groups lived one beside the other. They were, sure, interconnected on political and economical level, but with a strong, I would say, apartheid on cultural level. In many parts also living in clearly distinct geographical areas. There were no reciprocal interference in religious and cultural questions, and no, or perhaps very few, marriages between the groups. This fact of separation guaranteed a clear identity of each, not only confessional, but also cultural. And this led to a great stability of identities during centuries. This double distinction and separation as church and as ethnic and cultural group. Were there also theological reasons for the tolerance? I'm not sure, and I have doubts, but perhaps there were also secondary theological reasons, but the main reasons, I think, were the other ones. The 20th century changed a lot. Did it change also the way Christian identities are perceived? After this, my more general historical remarks, I want to come to the present age and focus on one specific church as an example, asking which is our identity as evangelical Lutherans in Romania today. So I come to the variety of elements which constitute the identity of the evangelical church in Romania, of Augsburg Confession. The history of our church is long and complicated. There is no chance to tell something in a few words. A century ago, there were more than 300,000 members. Nowadays, after the calamities of the 20th century, we are not much more than 10,000, spread over the whole region and country. A real situation of diaspora, indeed. But the fact is also that these few members the members left are very much conscious of their identity, of their will to exist, to live, and even to develop new perspectives. What constitutes this strong identity? I want now to specify in a more detailed way what I called above confessional and cultural, and I distinguish 5 defining elements. First, I would take it at the first place, nevertheless, the first point is the theological and liturgical tradition, which defines us. In the very name of our church, we find the abbreviation AAC, Augsburg Confession. Ecclesiologically, this confession of faith defines our identity, complemented by Luther's Catechism and other documents. In the life of our church, this faith is nourished by liturgy in a quite traditional Lutheran form, by the preaching, by the rich heritage of church hymns. And here, this is a especially important thing also, the church hymns. I just show you two pictures, and now this was now even too short, just a moment. Here the church hymn of 1788. So for the whole people, they had this kind of Gebetbuch, Gebet- und Liedbuch. There were many editions until even in communist time. It was a great achievement that it was possible to edit a new hymn book in 1974, and it was very important for the life of our church, for our identity. Next to the service book, the new service book. Okay, I go back to my list. Second point of identity is language. For most of our church members, the use of the German language is constitutive because it is part of our history of more than 800 years. Just this, I don't say much more about it. Third, I would mention the cultural traditions and heritage. Here I refer especially to the famous fortified churches, a huge and visible witness of great past, of the determination to defend the existence and identity of this group. Again, some pictures. This impressive fortified churches are located in villages, not in big cities. Just three examples. There are still, until today, 160 of these fortified churches through Transylvania. Nearly every village had such a building. There are, and the images, archetypical images of these fortified churches are deeply rooted in the self-consciousness of our church. Furthermore, as cultural tradition, I would mention here also the church music, still very important in our life. All these churches had beautiful orgs until today. I go back to my list. Fourth point, mentality and education. Throughout the centuries, the connections with the main areas of German-speaking countries was always maintained, despite of the geographical distance, especially through students who went to the universities of the West. I would say that our church is marked by a Western mentality, a Western way of understanding theology, of the vision of the place of the church in the world. This includes the conviction that critical thinking is something highly necessary in a rapidly changing world. Last point, our situation as minority. We belong to a small minority in Romania, confessionally and linguistically. This fact can lead to different attitudes. It can be passive defensive with the fear to become irrelevant, to disappear, or it can be also active creative with the conscience to have a mission for the society, for the whole country. So 5 defining elements, all them together constituted a quite strong identity for the members of our church, held them together despite the great difficulties related to the demographic trend of the last 50 years. But only the first of these elements, is explicitly theological. Is it appropriate to call the whole of my explanation Christian identity? Isn't it more cultural than Christian? Years ago, personally, I was more critical about the importance of these cultural elements for the spiritual life of a community. They seemed to me not only secondary, but even sometimes a kind of diversion from the pure faith. The churchgoers should seek the strengthening of their faith, not language or music. Today, I have a more differentiated view on this question. I think we can't divide these two parts easily, cultural and Christian. It is a whole. For example, language. Language is not only an external medium, can change easily, but in a religious context, it is also the language of the heart, because it is the language of our prayers. And therefore, in a kind, it is constitutive for our faith. Fortified churches and the church music, I think the religious dimension of them is evident. What about the Western mentality? It has a strong link, I think, with our way to see our responsibility for the world we live in. Critical thinking means to take up responsibility. It includes the dialogue between faith and reason, faith and science. Finally, the conscience as minority. Our engagement for the society, politics, education, comes from within a Christian conviction to serve our neighbors, to be the salt of the earth. So, as conclusion, the variety of elements in our Christian identity as Lutherans in Romania is both obvious and necessary. Our faith is an incarnate faith, is faith in a context. Perhaps, I ask myself, we could use rather another term instead of the abstract word identity. Isn't it about feeling at home? Feeling at home in the church means that I have my place there, my place, my home is my identity. This insight, if I am right, sheds light on the discussion about nationalism and cosmopolitanism, both very abstract notions, very political notions. Does the strengthening of local cultural traditions and the mother tongue within the church lead to nationalism, or at least to a kind of local patriotism, to a narrow perspective of faith with a tendency to be closed and egoistic? Or is it rather an instrument of the mission of the church to invite persons to feel at home? But in the same time, what about the others, the newcomers, the migrants? Can they feel at home too, together with us? There are no easy answers. Just a moment, I come to the last point, crisis and transformation. The 20th century led to a profound transformation also in our region, in our church. The world wars, the totalitarian systems, the growing migration. I already mentioned the dramatic loss of members due to the emigration of most of our members to Germany and other countries. In this new situation, the balance between the five elements is lost, partially lost. In Transylvania, we have a great number of impressive fortified churches in villages with a few or no more parish members left, without Sunday services. These churches became merely touristic objects. Through a growing number of mixed marriages, the German language has become, in some places, an obstacle for the participation in church life, instead of a pillar of our identity. One of the great challenges within our church is therefore the question, is it possible to change the language of our services and prayers without losing our identity? And about which identity do we speak now? It is complicated. In conclusion, this was in our church, in conclusion, about some words about the role of the ecumenical movement. The ecumenical movement began and flourished in the 20th century with a great goal and promise to strengthen the voice of the Christians, of the churches in a rapidly changing world. Together, the churches are stronger. Together, they can express more clearly and loudly the Christian voice, express their identity as believers in dialogue with other parts and groups of the world. I'm convinced that the ecumenical movement has brought important fruits. It led to the opening of churches for new perspectives, to manifold cooperation, to a deeper understanding of the other, but also of the deeper understanding of the own identity, because in the dialogue, through dialogue, you must be able to express clearly who you are. Ecumenical dialogue and more generally interreligious dialogue has different levels or can have different goals. It can be purely academic with the curiosity of knowing better the life and the faith of the other. It can be practical or political in order to cooperate in favor of our world. But it can be also a deeper dialogue, an encounter in which you try to understand the convictions of the other, the truth he or she believes in. Inevitably, such an attitude of openness leads also to the point where you question your own convictions of truth, where you deepen your understanding of the truth, of God, of faith. In such a sincere dialogue of truth, the partners don't remain unchanged. Therefore, ecumenism can be dangerous, or can be perceived as such. This is part of my experience in the 18 years I live now in Romania, in this country with a large majority of Christian Orthodox believers. 16 years ago, I have founded, together with colleagues of the Orthodox Theological Faculty of Sibiu, an Institute of Ecumenical Research. In this institutional context, we didn't remain at a distance, each in his corner. Rather, we developed common initiatives in theological education and research. This was and is a very enriching experience, but it didn't leave the partners unchanged. And not everybody is happy with this. I've been accused recently, especially, of interference in the internal life of the Orthodox Church, of being a threat for the integrity and identity of their tradition. I was, seems, too close. Yes, ecumenical dialogue is a risk. I wish you all that you don't be afraid to take such a risk upon you, to choose the encounter rather than closing you up in the fortress of dogmatic and ecclesiological walls, apparently within a clear identity, be it nationalist or cosmopolitan or whatever. In a world of growing polarization, we urgently need bridges. Or perhaps you rather think inverse? Would it be better to leave each other untroubled, to keep distance in order not to create conflicts within the churches and between the churches? Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Tobler, for giving us such a deep insight into the Lutheran Church of Augsburg confession in Transylvania and pointing out the different elements of identity, and also raising the question about ecumenism being, of course, a field of interaction which can be challenging in a good way and also sometimes perceived in a bad way, and not only perceived, but also, as you said from yourself, with real consequences. Thank you very much for your plea at the end, not to overcome threats and difficulties, to engage into dialogue and into cosmopolitanism. That's how I understood you. So our next lecturer will be from Katerina Pekridou. She is, as I said, working at the Conference of European Churches. And I hand over to you, Katerina, and I'm looking forward to your talk.
Thank you, Marcus, for the kind introduction. It's really hard to follow from after this very inspiring lecture of Professor Tobler. Very many points that I would like to discuss further. I'm very happy and I'm really honored to participate in this digital academy with so many young colleagues from around Europe. And I would really like to thank the organizers, the Protestant Federation of Hesse, especially Dr. Ortmann, the Community of Protestant Churches in Europe, and the Center for Protestant Theology in Eastern Europe, for this opportunity to be here with you today and discuss these important issues. In my own presentation, I will provide a brief overview of developments that contributed to the making of Orthodox ecclesial identities, especially in Southeast Europe. And I will attempt to give you an insight into the dynamics of church, nation, ethnicity, and state in the Orthodox world. I'm speaking, of course, from the experience of the Church of Greece, and this was the focus of the second text I shared with you in advance. I don't know if anyone had the time to read actually the texts, but there are, of course, parallels that one can draw with other Orthodox churches. In the last part of my presentation, I will highlight the ecclesiological challenge that the Orthodox Church is facing in a highly globalized era, where increased mobility and relocation of large populations is one of the defining characteristics of Christian identity. In the first part of my presentation, I'm using a lot three contemporary thinkers, Sinisa Malesevich from University College Dublin, Lucian Leustean from Aston University, and Paschalis Kitromilidis. I won't be referring constantly to the names because it's quite tiring online, but keep that in mind. As in the case of the churches of the Reformation, the identity of Orthodox churches has been shaped by various historical, political, and social factors. In order to understand the complex relationship of church, nation, ethnicity, and state in the Eastern Orthodox Church, one has to look into the gradual process of the establishment of independent Orthodox churches. After the French Revolution, the spread of modern nationalism throughout Europe raised significant challenges also for the Orthodox Commonwealth. The Greeks, Serbs, Romanians, and other peoples in the region began revolutionary campaigns asserting independence from the Ottoman Empire. In this process, political revolutions were followed closely by religious actions. Within the Ottoman Empire and the Rum-Millet system, Millet was an independent court of law which pertained to personal law, under which a confessional community, so the Christians, the Jews, the Muslims, were allowed to rule themselves under their own law. So in this system, the ecumenical patriarch represented the leader or the ethnarch that held both religious and political office to represent the Orthodox faithful in their relation with the Ottoman Empire. Political state independence was followed in the newly established states by the declaration of church independence, so that by the end of the 19th century, independent, or as we call them, autocephalous churches, were internationally recognized as national seats of religious power. For instance, the independence of Greece in 1832 was followed by the creation of the Church of Greece in 1850 that was separated from the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople. This strong link between the independence of the state and the church has contributed substantially to the widely shared view that the Eastern Orthodox churches have always been nationalist organizations. In this process, church leaders, clergy, and the faithful engaged in the spread of the nationalist ideology, and in many cases worked together with political elites in supporting the emergence of national states. A world-leading authority on questions related to the topic we're discussing, Kitromilidis, one of the professors I mentioned earlier, in his multi-layered work explains that the link between nationalism and the Orthodox Church has never been simple and straightforward. On the contrary, he argues that both the church and the nationalist ideologies have experienced substantial transformations over the past 250 years. In his work, he documents how in the late 18th century, influential Orthodox clerics were open to many strands on the Enlightenment project. In the mid and late 18th century, several highly educated Orthodox clerics were keen to incorporate the Enlightenment ideas into the religious canon, aiming to offer a spiritual extension or an alternative to what they regarded to be an overly materialist understanding of progress. However, from the late 18th and in the early 19th century, the Orthodox Church establishment came to oppose to nationalist ideas and practices. As the same scholar observes, there were two principal reasons why the key representatives of the Orthodox Church became antagonistic towards nationalism. First, They gradually realized that nationalism, as articulated in the aftermath of the French and the American revolutions, was conceived as a profoundly secular, liberal, and modernizing project, which had little understanding for the traditional religious thought and practices. In this regard, liberal nationalism was perceived as an ideological enemy of Orthodox Christianity, and as such represented a threat to the Church and the Orthodox way of life. Second, despite the organized concept of autocephaly, of having independent churches, the Orthodox world largely represented a unified cultural space that was underpinned by the shared universalist creed of Orthodox Christianity. Both the Byzantine and Ottoman empires preserved this shared cultural space, which existed not only in the domain of the high culture of Constantinople, but even more so in the everyday life of Orthodox Christian population. While before the age of nationalism, the Orthodox Commonwealth was a shared cultural space where clerics, monks, governmental officials, traders, merchants, and others were integrated in the wider transactional networks across the region, the emergence of independent nation states largely diminished such wider cultural links. Once the principle of nationhood upstaged that of religion and lineage, there was little room for the genuine cultural interaction across the state borders. Unlike their imperial counterparts, which unintentionally created space for the transcultural activities, the new nationalizing states, driven by different geopolitical motives and by different ideological ambitions, mostly closed off these avenues for greater cultural interaction. In this context, the old Byzantine idea of autocephaly, which originally did not relate to nationhood, was radically changed and utilized by the political rulers for their nationalist purposes. I'm turning now to the situation of Orthodox churches in more recent decades. From the end of the 1980s, migration movements in Europe have taken on new forms and dynamics: political refugees, asylum seekers, economic migrants, clandestine immigration characterized often by human trafficking, immigration for reasons of ecological destruction, and more. All this mobility has led to an increasingly multinational, multilinguistic, multi-religious, and multicultural situation in Europe, but also beyond. We have witnessed recent migration flows from Russia, the Balkans, and the former Eastern Bloc in Europe, the USA, and Australia after the fall of the Berlin Wall and in the post-communist period. When thinking of the Orthodox world, these flows have been motivated primarily by economic reasons, but also in some cases for intellectual or political reasons. Concerning the Orthodox churches beyond Europe, there have also been movements of members of the Antiochian church, for example, from the Lebanese and the Syrian churches, fleeing from war and economic collapse. These movements since the 70s and the 80s, together with the earlier massive flows in the 1920s out of Asia Minor and after the Russian Revolution, were for the ex-communist bloc composed mainly of Orthodox Christians, and in the case of Africa and also the Middle East, of Christians of various confessions. These various large migration movements originating from the Orthodox world have resulted in the emergence of a multi-jurisdictional ecclesial space, which was until then unknown in the Orthodox Church and is referred to as diaspora. The Orthodox diaspora is an ecclesial space which several national churches enter and infiltrate, thus providing a basis for an extension of their territorial jurisdictions. This situation cannot be justified by Orthodox canon law and the ancient principle of having one bishop in every city. Philetism, which means distinctions based purely on differences of language and ethnic origin, has led to the coexistence on the same territory and in the same cities of several national or ethnic jurisdictions, a situation which is an overwhelming majority of Orthodox see as normal. Often in this situation, the emphasis is on preserving the different cultural heritages of each country of origin, overlooking in this way the universal message and character of the gospel. The temptation to nationalism and philitism, which was condemned as heresy by the Synod of Constantinople in 1872, is deeply rooted in the consciousness of many Orthodox Christians and contradicts the universal vision of the Orthodox Church. In an opening address to the Fourth Preconciliar Pan-Orthodox Conference in Geneva in 2009, Metropolitan John Zizioulas underlined that the traditional organization of the Church was based on the principle of territoriality and not nationality. He described the multiplicity of the overlapping of different ethnic Orthodox dioceses as scandalous, as it contradicts the theological and liturgical tradition of the Orthodox Church, which understands the local church as the Eucharistic assembly presided by the bishop and celebrated in a concrete place. As Kalaididis and as Proulis underline in the text, the second text I shared, Eucharist, Catholicity, and universality form the identity of the Church and define the self-consciousness of the early Christian communities, as we can see from the eschatological dimension of Christianity, which played a decisive role in the theological and liturgical tradition of Orthodoxy. There is no Eucharist without the foretaste of the eschaton, of the final times, and there is no Catholicity and universality without the eschatological origins as a departure from the physical bonds and determinations of race, country, nation, language, culture, gender, and more. The term local church now means for many Orthodox national church. As a result, the question of what is generally referred to as the Orthodox diaspora constitutes one of the most serious problems facing the Orthodox Church today. The diaspora leads to philitism because what seems to matter most is no longer to organize the Church around synodality and the Eucharist, having one bishop, one Eucharist, one body of Christ, but around ethnicity, political and religious, and also ideological preferences. At the Holy and Great Council of the Orthodox Church, which was held in Crete in 2016, the diaspora question was much debated and a text was adopted which does indeed open up prospects for the future, particularly by strengthening the role of assemblies of bishops as a way of demonstrating and reinforcing the unity of the Orthodox Church in the so-called diaspora countries where the Church is present. At the same time, the document recognizes that this is only a transitional solution pending the future establishment in situations of overlapping territories of the only canonically sanctioned ecclesiological principle, namely that of single jurisdiction territories. The national Orthodox churches, despite all being aware today of the diaspora and understanding it as an alienating ecclesial canonical problem for the Church, are not yet ready to reach unanimous agreement on a solution appropriate to the needs of our time. I would like to close with a quote of Serbian theologian, Father Justin Popovic, which summarizes well the patristic tradition that the Orthodox churches uphold in their theological reflection, and also shows the contradiction with the current situation that they are experiencing. The Church is ecumenical, Catholic, divine, human, eternal, and for this reason it entails a blasphemy, an unforgivable blasphemy against Christ and the Holy Spirit, to make the Church a national institution, to allow her to the small, finite, and to narrow her to the small, finite and temporal purposes and methods of a nation. Its purpose is supranational, ecumenical, and pan-human. Its purpose is to unite in Christ all people completely, regardless of nationality or race or social stratum. There is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither bond nor free. There is neither male nor female. For ye all are one in Christ Jesus, because Christ is all and in all. Thank you for your attention, and I really look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Katerina, Ms. Pekridou. That was fascinating. That was really interesting. At least I was not aware of the major challenges which are taking part right now in the present in the Orthodox world and Orthodox churches. The question of nationalism and ethnicity, how this relates to the purpose of church, the aims of church. Is it to unite beyond all these categories, these elements? What is going to be in the future? What is the way? No one probably can tell. But thank you very much for this insight. Fascinating. Thank you very much. So now it's time for you, if you like to open your mic to ask comprehension question. I cannot stress that enough. There's going to be time for the discussion afterwards. Just if there's the one thing that you did not quite understand, which is very important, vital to your understanding of the whole lecture of Professor Tobler, of Ms. Pekridou, please open your mic now. This shouldn't be more than 5 minutes, maybe just one or two of you if there is questions. If not, we carry on to our next point of the schedule. But please feel free to ask questions to our lecturers. Yes, I see one hand raised, Maximilian Breisch.
Yes, I didn't really understand. I think you called it the principle of territoriality. When was it given by whom, and in what did it consist exactly? Because, yeah, in the Orthodox world.
Yeah, thank you. Well, everything has to do with how the canons of the church were developed. So this was a process of many centuries. So there are several canons from the different ecumenical and local synods. And this concept of every independent church having a specific territory where it is active and it serves comes from these canons, basically, but it's not just one thing. So, and it has to do with the development, of course, of the different national churches, as I explained, after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. There's a lot of detail in the history for every situation. So I just, mentioned the Greek case very quickly. But yeah, the idea is basically that a church is a local church which exists in a specific territory, and you shouldn't enter in another space, and the other Orthodox churches as well shouldn't enter in your space. That's the basic idea.
Is there another question? Yes, was that clear? Did it clear it up? Yes. Another question, if that is so. I don't see all of you here in the panel, so please open your mic and ask your question. I see a hand raised. Yes, maybe one last question from Getter, please.
Good evening, Katerina. Kalispera. You mentioned the decision in 1872 in Constantinople that Philigism was abandoned or prohibited. Can you tell us when did Orthodox churches or church governments start to talk about that issue, to see the problem? Was it only in 1872 or before?
Yeah, thank you. I think the problems or the problems in their self-understanding started immediately after the fall of the empire. So they were used to having a specific idea of how they occupied as church, the broader space, the geographical areas. And then when national churches were created, many of them due to political forces in the different regions, the question started to be more obvious. Already, I think in the Bulgarian case, which had asked to become, several leaders had asked to become a separate church. It was much earlier than the 1872. So, and there were different incidents over the centuries. So the major discussion, I guess, came to a culmination at that point, and that's why the synod, local synod, was convened in Constantinople at that time to discuss this problem and to, which was obviously seen as an issue, philletism. Now, of course, the follow-up is an interesting question, because in theory the churches have accepted that philletism is a sin and a heresy, but in practice, all of them in their life continue to function like that.
Okay, so then with one eye on our time, I suggest that we carry on now with the possibility for discussions in small groups. So this is what's going to happen. I'm going to create breakout rooms, and these breakout rooms will be filled with more or less 5 people. And you have, I will estimate the time as well, 10 to 15 minutes. And in these 10 to 15 minutes, you can, of course, talk to each other about the impressions of your of the lecturers. But we also prepared 2 key questions. So one question to each or deriving from each of the lectures. And again, I'm going to post these questions in the chat. So the first question, which is a follow up to the lecture of Professor Tobler. How do you see the responsibility of churches, or rather faith communities, and their leadership concerning the politicization of faith within and beyond church? And I'm sorry, I think, Katerina, that was your question. Is that right? Yes, I'm sorry. That is the question which derives from the second lecture we heard. So the question about the responsibility, if there is any, of churches and leaders concerning these external factors, which would be, in this case, the politicization of the faith. The second question, which was more followed from the talk of Professor Tobler. The first one is more an assessment for the identity of Christian group. So parish, church, cultural elements, as we said before, play sometimes an important role. And now the question, do you see this positive, or does it reduce or threaten the spiritual character of a faith-based community? I give you an advice, copy these 2 questions into a Word document or whatever when you're in the for your discussion in the breakout rooms.
Post them
yet.
Excuse me? Oh,
I don't see them in the chat.
I'm so very sorry. Again, I posted it to Volkmar because I dropped out the, as you might have noticed, I dropped out of the discussion. That's why I had to come in again. Okay. So now you should be able to see them.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so if you are already, there's one little thing after this discussion in your group, you might want to maybe focus on one of the questions if you want them both. I would like one of you of the groups to give us a real quick talk about what were the findings in your group. But this is going to be like 1 to 2 minutes of each group, not too much. So just to give us all a general idea what you discussed in your group. And then after this presentation, we come to the last point of on our agenda, which is the group discussion in the plenum. All right, so let me get started with the conference rooms. So it's going to be 6 rooms, and you will be find yourself in a conference room automatically. You just have to accept the invitation. And hopefully, Stefan, Tobler, and Katerina, you are not in the same one. Let's see. Okay, let's see if I can have this one here. Come back to everyone. I'm not, I don't know how it was in your groups, but at least the group I joined, it was like this, that everyone had one saying, but the last one had a saying and was cut off in the middle of the argument. Unfortunately, time is always a thing. I hope you did get into a discussion and you could find some positions and some ideas. Everything that had no time in the small groups will hopefully have the time now in the plenum, when every one of us will have the possibility to come into to talk to each other, also with our 2 lecturers. All right, so you know which group you were in, and I would really like you to give a short presentation on what you talked about. If there were any findings, open questions, which could serve for as a good basis for our discussion in the plenum. I'm not sure if you know who was group 1, group 2, whatever. Just open your mic and start your talk. I will interrupt you after 2 minutes, okay? So whoever, please be first. Not everyone at a time, please. Just anyone, please.
I would like to start.
Thank you.
We talked about in our group about both questions, and about for this first question we mentioned that also in today's church, and also in the historical background, we can see that the churches have huge responsibility. For instance, in teaching, in education, to teach the members of churches to know common values and ethical knowledge, and I think in the historical background we can see that the responsibility of churches has a huge strength, and the churches can and could be could a strange role. They could play a strange role in the communities.
Okay, thank you very much. Advocating for the strong role of churches in communities, and past and maybe present, maybe future. Who is the second to give a short insight to your group discussion? Don't be too polite. Please open your mic and talk.
So the second group, or just anyone?
Anyone. If everyone knows who's the second group, well, then please be the second of the second group.
So I'm not.
Just give your talk.
Follow up, but
yeah.
So we had, I would say, a good discussion and sharing of something of thoughts and ideas, and like one idea is about like the influence on from culture and politics on like our identity as church or as Christian. We would say it's okay to have this influence, but there's kind of border, like it shouldn't be the influence too exclusivistic, that you have like maybe, for example, just one language where people can go, or just because it's one special group who has one tradition and one culture, and like other people who are living in this country are not able to go inside this group because there are a lot of barriers of language, of culture, of society, something like that. And we had, or for example, the thought like what it's about the parishes, like for example, German parishes in France or in the world, like if there's like an too exclusivistic group, or is it okay for people to have like your German church also anywhere on the world? And on the second question about the politicization of church, we share the ideas. In the first hand, it's okay to be proud, like to be a Bavarian Lutheran or a Georgian Orthodox or something like that. Like we would say, yeah, it's okay, but it shouldn't be that politics or like state or nationalism should influence theology, because Ms. Pekridou showed in her article that like it's not the idea of Christianity is not to be like a nationalist. It's the idea it's to be Christian, to believe in God, and to have this spiritual home who is like thought from the future, from eschatology. So yeah, it was really a good thought, and yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So a plea for openness and cosmopolitanism, and let's hear the maybe if you know who the third group was, then please speak of the third group.
Maybe that's our group. I'm not sure. We started to make a big differentiation between bringing politics into church and bringing church into politics or into the society. And there was a quote of a professor in Hungary who said, we don't need to have politics in church, but we need to have church dialogue in society. And why don't we just try to change the direction? So to have more church dialogue or discourse in society, but not letting enter all politics into our church, because so we lose somehow also the freedom of the church. And I have one example. I don't mention the country now, but let's say a state representative from country A is going to the people of country A in country B, like diaspora. And when the church had a jubilee, that state representative brought a flag to the church of country A, like of the minority in country B. If you get what I'm saying. So if you give this as a gift, the church parishioners, they don't have the chance to say, no, we don't want to have that flag in our church, because everyone has seen she brought a flag of that country into the church in another country. So if you don't put the flag on the wall, some people within your own congregation will say they are traitors, they don't like their own country. And if you put it in the wall, you have politics in your church building. I hope you understood what I was saying. So often you don't have a choice, and you also saw that we cannot separate culture from Christianity, not totally, but we should maybe focus like what is the first focus and what is second, third focus, especially if you're a minority. You cannot totally separate, but you should take care of your church not losing freedom.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jetter. Unfortunately, the sound was not too good this time when you used to give your talk. As far as I understood, a plea of knowing that this is not separable. separable, yeah. But please focus on the theological part. Don't get too much involved or driven by the political aspect. Don't bring the state into or the politics into church too much. If I did not understand it quite well, maybe later on. Next presentation, group 4, or well, the 4th to present.
Yeah, so I was in the 4th group, and like our group was composed, was I not? KD? I think we were number 4, right? Okay, sorry. But yeah, so our group consisted of all like post-Austro-Hungarian countries, so it was really nice to see like the differences between them. And we've experienced in those like 10 minutes that it's like positive to make culture a part of the church. Because you can talk to the people better, you can understand them better, and like living in that culture and taking its parts into the message can help you to approach the people better. So like culture and approach, they go hand in hand. And then in the Hungarian churches, like we had like two Reformed members of our group. It's real important, like the nationalism part, like the being a Hungarian plays like a real important role in that. Yeah, so like being a member of church means being like a member of some nation. And then in Slovakia, that's another post Austro-Hungarian land. There's a little difference to it. Then like in that land, the distinction between like the biggest Roman Catholic Church and the Lutheran Church, is like the number 1 in that culture. So that's what we discussed.
Thank you very much for the quick overview. So a variety of identities which have developed throughout the last 100 years. Used to be one country, and now the different roles national consciousness and identity plays within these different churches. Thank you very much. We come to the 5th group, so not the last, but yes, almost the last group.
I try to speak for group number 2. We discussed about the question of politicization, and first we argued whether if this politicization of faith within a church depends on the fact if it is a majority or a minority in that country, and because the 3 or 4 of us were in a minority church. No, forget this information. I think the conclusion was that the way politics into church is much more often in a majority church, and is no danger in a minority church. But the other way, as we heard from others, the other way, how the church takes part into politics or in the society, that does not depend on the size of a church. And then we discussed about this, if a church should take part in the politics of a country. And there we had again 2 different positions, because yes, in Germany, where the church is much more bigger than Romania, where the other 3 members were from. In Germany, it is good that the church has something to say and participates in the political discussions. The other point of view was that no, Christian messages are never general rules, but always refer to a certain situation, and you cannot generalize this and make it politics. Yes, you can say something in the society, was our common conclusion, but never take part as a ruler into a society.
Thank you very much. So the question of politicization and whether it has a deeper effect on minorities or majorities, if that plays a role as a factor, and then yeah, how churches should take part in public discussions and political discussions. Last group, as far if I counted correctly.
Hi, yeah, so I would just first like to thank you for the good questions. I think we covered them both in somewhat interesting manner. And I would say, well, I would start with the second question and say that faith is not internal, nor is it external. So it is both. And by that being said, I would say that the traditions and cultures bear great importance in emphasizing and extending the spiritual importance. And about the first question, of course, as a church, as a community, we should participate in different structures and different fields, including politics as such, but we should also bear in mind that it is highly individual. As individuals, especially nowadays, we have quite some, provoking subjects. For example, we came to the example of me participating in a Sunday church ceremony, and it covered the subject about vaccines and the pandemics as a whole. So the way I saw it, and of course, I can't be biased. I doubt that most people aren't. The subject, yes, was about the vaccines and actually about listening to what the faith and what the 10 commandments tell us and how we should all oblige to getting the vaccine and to really obey the societal rules. But the question for me was about the context, actually, about the fragility of one's mind and the place in which to express one's opinion. So what I did was I actually walked out of the church.
Yes,
it was not because I wouldn't be, I don't know, because I wouldn't want to participate. It was because I didn't see fit to have politics in such a manner in a church. So yes, there is a perceived threat in church participating in politics, because we want to make a step closer to the person and not have the person, turn around and go away. And we would like to, really hold that gentle and delicate structure.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Yasu. Unfortunately, I only heard the last a few sentences. Again, a problem with tone, but I think that the idea was not to get into politics in church because you exclude by doing so. I'm sorry for not hearing the first one, but that one was very clear to me. Yes, I think we had all presentations from our group. Is that right? Or did we miss, or did I miss out any group? Well, if that is not the case, we have not quite 15 minutes left before we have our farewell of today. But now we are hopefully on fire for the last 10 to 12 minutes of discussion in this plenum. As I said again, this is only, of course, 2 hours, only a teaser to the topic. There's coming more in Vienna in the conference in May. But yeah, if you have a question to our lecturers or to the audience, if you want to make a statement, again, please feel free to open your mic. Whoever comes first will talk first. Andre, just talk.
Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, like this isn't like really a revolutionary question from now, but does someone know, like maybe from our reference, why the churches, like the Protestant churches or the Lutheran churches, have like Augsburg Confession in that name? Like, of course they are Augsburg Confession churches, but why is it like that important that we actually like have to have a German city in the name of the church?
Mr. Tobler, please.
Just a historical reason. In the Habsburgian Empire, there were only 2 Protestant confessions allowed to exist, the Reformed and the Lutheran, and they had to, those who had referred, the Lutheran who referred to the Augsburg Confession, and the Reformed who referred to the Second Helvetia posterior. So they called HB and AB or HB. So this is just a historical heritage of our name going back to that time. But in fact, the Augsburg Confession is the main confession for all Lutheran churches all around the world. And it's just casually, that was just not important as a German city because it was just a moment where it was formulated.
Thank you.
Other remarks, questions to now you have the chance. Take it. Opinions.
I have a question to Katerina Pekridou. Like you mentioned in your lecture that there's the idea of territoriality in Orthodox theology, and like is an idea which they follow up and try to make like the German Orthodox Church or like the Orthodox Church of United Kingdom or something like that, or the idea where you can never change it, that you have like in each country like the Greek Orthodox Church of Germany, the Russian Orthodox Church of Germany, something like that. So is there a kind of you can't ever change it, or they don't want to change it because it would be much better to have like one bishop for like one country like it is?
Yeah, thank you. Well, the whole idea of territoriality goes back to the ancient church and the way that the early communities were built when the church started growing. So I guess 4th century. So when the community started growing, there used to be a bishop, and around the bishop, the assembly of the church with the presbyters, the deacons, and the other ministries and the lay people. And the idea then was that the church, the local church, was the church of that area, of that territory, which could include many nationalities, many languages, many cultures. So what happens now is that people, especially from the Orthodox Church, migrating to Western Europe, the USA, other countries, and other continents, establish their own community in the country where they go, and they try to use their language in the services and in the life of the church, and preserve the culture. I guess that situation is problematic because you end up having 4 bishops in one city of the 4 different Orthodox churches, for example, or even more. So that is actually against the canon law of the Orthodox Church. So that's why it is problematic. And of course, they all recognize that it needs to change, but how it's going to change, they haven't figured out. And that's why in the Council of 2016, I copied the document that refers to this question on the chat, the question of diaspora. They suggested as an intermediary solution to have assemblies of bishops of the different churches in the different countries where they are, and to try to come to some agreement. And they try to also specify rules on how the process of decision making will be going forward. But yeah, it's really against the theology of the church and against of the understanding and the canons of the church. So it's, yeah, it needs to be resolved.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a question, if you allow me.
Yes, please.
I would like to ask Professor Tobler, because especially about the situation in Transylvania, I've never been in the region, and it's really fascinating to hear about the tolerance and coexistence. I'm just curious how the secularization process plays in that region. Is it at all influencing the identities of people, or in a good or a bad way, or it's not an issue? Thank you. I'm just...
I would say compared with other countries, it is not an issue, because Romania is a highly religious country. Over 90% of the population believe in God, and are 95% are members of churches. So this is, for the moment, it's not really an issue. It's an issue only in a small elite of, perhaps of a small academic elite of persons. For the moment, it is not. I would say so. Perhaps somebody would contradict me, but that's the case. Is the persons go to church. Many new churches built, Orthodox churches built after 89, and they are really needed. They are full. It's not they build now not empty churches, but full churches.
Thank you.
I think there's a hand raised. Ms. Lerich, is that right?
Yes.
Yes, please.
I also have a question for Katerina Pekridou, if that's right. And I was wondering, like, what role the nationalities or the national churches have in the inner Orthodox questions or rules, if that's like a main factor, or not, or how they, like, I was just thinking of the like some time ago of the Orthodox Church in the Ukraine, and how there were many questions about that, and was wondering if it's mainly about the national parties or if there are also other factors.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we need another lecture to resolve the Ukrainian question. But of course, nationality there plays a role. But I think the most important in that case is the fact that there is a canon law which has never been revised. So, and there is, this means, imagine from the first ecumenical councils, there are laws that apply today. So over centuries, the different Orthodox churches interpret them also in different ways. And there has never been something like Vatican II